So now you can hear me. Oh, I love it. It's not my fault, guys. It's the system that keeps doing this to me every time there's some sort of update in the system. It goes and it resets all these things. So apologies for the no sound there for the first minute of the show. That's going to be on me. That's my fault. So yeah, you guys are probably at this point pretty upset, but don't worry. The sound is on now. We got to do a few things here first. I was going to tell you guys what we're going to be covering here in this episode, and what we're going to be covering is a brand new Q post. We're going to be going through what it means. Why is he warning us of a major collapse on the horizon? What that's going to look like. We're going to get into details on it. Plus, we're going to look at the breaking news coming out about Trump and this infighting between the party. We're also going to be looking at some other major stories that are going across the board. Yeah, it upsets me when the system does this kind of stuff, and then you can't really know until you go live with it. So it's just, but we have a bunch of other news stories. Like I said, we're going to update Twitter with Elon and all the stuff happening there. This is also going to go through a bunch of other stuff we're going to get into. So with that being said, let me just go ahead and do a quick ad read. It's Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. But let's go ahead and read through it. It says, who are the silent thieves? Why are they manipulating you? How are they stealing your wealth? Bubble, crash, steal, lie, repeat. What is inflation? Monetary manipulation, taxation without representation. Put an end to the endless 1913 Q. Well, I think Q is telling us what we all know, the writing's on the wall, that there is a global financial collapse coming, that it's all manufactured, it's all orchestrated by the same entities that helped create the Federal Reserve. They're the ones who are going to be crashing the economy, coming up very shortly, coming to a town and a city near you. I do believe 100% that that's what's coming. That's what Q's warning us about. Who are the silent thieves? Well, let's go ahead and say it, exactly who we are, or who they are. They are the globalist banking cartels. They are the same factions that are backing the uniparty deep state factions that are undermining our country, infiltrating all of our institutions. They're the same entities and forces that are backing globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, the United Nations, and so on and so forth. And I have a couple videos that give you a very good idea of what these organizations are, who they are, thanks to, Greg Reese over at InfoWars for basically giving us these videos that give us a good idea of what it is and what it looks like. And here's the first one that gives you kind of a rundown. This is from March 15, 2020, when this video was put up by Greg Reese over at band.video. And I think it's perfect because it goes through what the globalist banking cartel looks like, what was established in 1913, the Federal Reserve, how that came to be, and just a lot of information that's going to be useful for discussion that we're going to have here. So let's watch.
In 1816, the gold standard, an economic unit of account based on a fixed quantity of gold, was officially adopted, and the world reserve currency became the British pound sterling. In 1914, after World War I, nations attempted to revive the gold standard, but it collapsed during the Great Depression. Also in 1914, the Federal Reserve Bank, a private company, was born. After Britain was devastated by World War II, they were no longer a superpower, and so the global reserve currency needed to be reset. In 1944, at the Bretton Woods Conference, the US dollar became the new global reserve currency. This established America as the dominant power in the world economy, giving America the sole ability to print dollars. The rest of the world would need to trade their own currency against the US dollar in order to balance exchange rates, keeping the international economy vibrant and fluid. But by the 1960s, the United States had printed more USD than their gold reserves could cover. And by 1970, a growing American trade deficit was undermining the value of the dollar. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon brought an end to the gold standard. Federal Reserve notes, a fiat currency backed by debt rather than gold, became the new standard. This is basically no different than an IOU. As one would expect, right after President Nixon gave his speech, inflation began to rise and America's biggest export became debt. The creation of the petrodollar gave the U.S. even more sway over world economies, and today the international debt has become untenable. And many are saying another global currency reset is needed. Historically, the gold standard has been the most stable economy we have known, but gold can be manipulated and disruptive as well. Some are suggesting that cryptocurrency could be the solution. Crypto is run by an algorithm and can be designed to meet specific needs. The global currency needs to have fluid supply, and the limited gold supply failed to keep up with economic growth. A sovereign-free, algorithm-based alternative could potentially be more stable. China is almost ready to launch their own cryptocurrency, DCEP, short for Digital Currency Electronic Payments. DCEP is government-controlled and fully centralized. So far, it appears to be a digital version of fiat paper money. The Federal Reserve Bank is developing their own crypto called FedCoin.
Are trying to do, and then finally, the monetary manipulation and taxation without representation, that almost goes without saying. That's exactly where we're at. The monetary manipulation is the inflation. It is the taxation without representation that we see on a global basis. It is the billions of dollars being sent to Ukraine to fight this war, which aren't even being used to fight the war. They're just being used to launder money back to the pockets of the corrupt politicians who are signing off these big checks from our taxpayer dollars to globalist regimes that are unaccountable, that have no form of checks or balances, or no form of an ability to audit where the money goes, how it's spent, where it ends up. It is all amazing, and it's all facilitated, as it says here, 1913, putting an end to the endless. The Federal Reserve Bank, which is about as Federal Express, as we all say as a joke. It's not federal. It's not a part of the government. It is a private entity owned by private banking corporations that does what it wants outside of the jurisdiction of the United States federal government, and the federal government is more than happy to sign off on that. So I have to ask the question, can we destroy the Fed? People saying in the comments. I hope so. I think it's coming. It's only a matter of time, right? But until then, we have a lot to face here. I'm getting a strong hint of that there. But on top of that, you have, speaking of hoaxes, Hillary Clinton now posting today the photo of her landing at Bosnia as a kind of a Veterans Day tribute to our veterans. You have the thanks of a grateful nation. We so appreciate all of you and your families do to serve your country. Well, look, I do appreciate all the soldiers, but I think it's hilarious that Hillary Clinton is so tone deaf, or just evil, probably both, that she literally put she put her own video or picture of her when she landed in Bosnia. Remember the scandal where she told everybody she landed under sniper fire? Except I don't see any snipers here, and it looks like they're just standing, in the runway. So, yeah, that was a kind of an interesting story today. Elon Musk fact checks Reuters in their latest hit piece. They say he was going to start shipping Chinese Teslas to America, and he fact checked them by saying false. And everybody's like, yay for Elon. He's so funny. He's so cool. He's so hip. He's so, I don't trust the guy. He's a Satanist. He's a transhumanist. That article doesn't refute the fact that he's working with the Chinese communists, that he has factories in communist China. He's producing stuff with them. And he's talked openly about how much he loves their command control authoritarian social credit score system and how he wants to make Twitter into that. So I don't trust Elon Musk. He is a Satanist. He wore a costume on Halloween, and people go, it's just a costume. I don't care if it's Halloween. First of all, I don't celebrate Halloween. It's a pagan holiday. It's a satanic holiday for witches and all that stuff. But then beyond that, he wears a costume on Halloween, I use air quotes there, that was called the Champion of Satan leather armor set. And it had a picture of Baphomet on the chest plate of a piece of leather armor with an upside down cross in the middle that was not like, one of those funny, cartoon costumes. It was like, this guy seriously went out and spent 10 grand on a leather armor set that was called the Champion of Satan army set. So, but he's the best. Twitter brings back the official badge, and it appears that $8 verification program has backfired. Pretty hilarious to see what happened here. So now everybody was able to get their Twitter badge with their check mark, and it just went off the rails quickly. People impersonating everything from Tesla, where it says here a second Tesla's hit the World Trade Center, obviously a parody account, but with the blue check mark, a lot of people fell for it, all the way up to Lockheed Martin, who said they were going to halt sales. This is a fake Lockheed Martin account, Lockheed Martini, saying that they were going to halt sales to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States until they, investigate their human rights abuses. Eli Lilly and Company saying they were going to announce free insulin from and another one here from Eli Lilly saying, we apologize, has been served a misleading message from a fake Lilly account. Our official Twitter is LilyPad. Oh, okay. And it goes down the board. Trans women are women, no longer team turf, y'all. People being fooled. Tony Blair was impersonated. George Bush was impersonated. Pretty hilarious. So what they've done now on Twitter is they've canceled it. So now you can't get the verification badge for paying $8 until they figure out how to fix the system that they've broken. That'll be hilarious. I'm sure that'll go down well. Let's watch this breakdown, though, of the FTX collapse. This is an interesting look at it. Watch this.
This is Sam Bankman-Fried. People call him SBF. He's the founder of FTX. He also controlled a crypto hedge fund called Alameda Research, but that's all gone now. He wants you to think he's this sweet guy. He even brought in a famous YouTuber who called him the most generous man in the world. Yep, that happened. Truth is, Sam Bankman-Fried is a liar and a crook. His personal crypto, FTX token, was basically a Ponzi scheme hidden below layers of Moonbro jargon. He even went on Bloomberg's podcast and bragged about it. Yep, that happened. He used his Ponzi token as collateral to borrow billions of real dollars that he couldn't pay back. He then used those real dollars to build an empire out of dying companies like Voyager and BlockFi. This led Jim Cramer to call him the new JP Morgan. That's weird. It's not like Jim Cramer to promote a billionaire con artist. SBF sold people cryptos like Bitcoin, or so they thought. What they really bought from SBF was an IOU. But as long as everyone didn't cash in their IOU at the same time, the scheme worked. Until it didn't. This other a-hole who hates SBF came along and engineered a bank run with some passive-aggressive tweets. It worked. SBF didn't have enough money to repay everyone at once, and now his customers have lost everything. He'll be happy to know that this is exactly how every bank in the world operates. So where did all the money go? He misappropriated $4 billion trying to save his failing hedge fund. Whoops, that's a felony. He spent $21 million on Super Bowl commercials, $5 million for the big guy, $40 million in campaign donations. I wonder what he wanted in return. And everyone who's pointing at this story and saying,
this is exactly why we need to regulate crypto.
Remember that SBF stole billions. That's already a crime. And he spent a lot of it on bribing politicians. Also a crime, in order to create a crypto monopoly for himself. Government regulations don't protect the customers. They protect the crooks. That's exactly what SBF was trying to do.
Yeah, I thought that was a good breakdown of it, and I just wanted to share that because that kind of gives you the insight. But I mean, the people who were involved in this, Tom Brady had a stake, Steph Curry had a stake, some people, obscure people like NFL players like Aaron Jones, who's a running back for the Green Bay Packers, had a stake in it. Some famous, semi-famous people had stakes in this company. I'm trying to think of who else. Random tennis star Naomi Osaka, don't know who that is, and others. But they were all given. If you can only imagine how this is going to turn out, it's probably not going to end well. That's all I'll say. And you guys can make of that what you will. And so that's going to be where we go ahead and leave it. If you guys don't know, we're going to actually look at our God's Grace is Greater segment, where we go into the scripture and we talk about God's grace. Now, it's truly greater. Today, we're looking at the story of Jesus feeding the 4,000. An incredible story. This is after Jesus has already fed a crowd of 5,000 men We're going to see Jesus feed a crowd of 4,000 men with almost no food at all. And we're going to look at what we can learn from this story and what we can pull out of it. We're starting Mark chapter 8, verse 1, and we're going to be reading all the way up to verse 21. And we're going to talk about it. And we're just going to read through these verses. We left off in chapter 7, finishing chapter 7 of Mark yesterday. We're going through all the major gospels. We started in Matthew. We're in Mark. We're in Mark chapter 8. We're starting chapter 8 today. Let's go ahead and read. In those days, there was again a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat. He summoned the disciples and said to them, I have compassion on the crowd, because they have already stayed with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, and some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered him, where can anyone get enough bread here in this desolate place to fill these people? How many loaves do you have? He asked them. 7, they said. Then he commanded them to sit down and on the ground. Taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks, broke the loaves, and kept on giving them to his disciples to set before the people. So they served the loaves to the crowd. They also had a few small fish, and when he blessed them, he said these were to be served as well. They ate and were filled. Then they collected 7 large baskets of leftover pieces. About 4,000 men were there, and he dismissed them and immediately got into the boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, demanding of him a sign from heaven to test him. But, sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation demand a sign? I assure you, no sign will be given to this generation. Then he left them, got on board the boat, and went to the other side. They had forgotten to take bread, and had only 1 loaf with them in the boat. Then he commanded them, watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They were discussing among themselves that they didn't have any bread. Aware of this, he said to them, why are you discussing that you don't have any bread? Don't you understand or comprehend? Is your heart hardened? Do you have eyes and not see? Do you have ears and not hear? Or do you not remember when I broke 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full and pieces did you collect? 12, they told him. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large baskets of full pieces of bread did you collect? 7, they said. And he said to them, don't you understand yet? Now, this is an interesting story that goes through a number of different things here. And the reason I'm going to break it down in a few different ways is because I think it tells us a few different points, a few different very important lessons that we can learn from this lesson in the gospel. The first being that Jesus had compassion on this crowd that was following him. And again, they didn't have enough food to make it home. And he said they were hungry and they would collapse. So what does he do? He says we need to feed them. Now, what's amazing in this is that Jesus is with his disciples who had already helped him feed 5,000 people with, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was 5 loaves and 2 fish that he was able to feed 5,000 people with because he broke it, he gave thanks, and it was multiplied by a miracle that he created through God and himself being the Son of God. Now, we're sitting here and the disciples are looking at this crowd. Jesus says, let's feed them. And they say, we don't have enough food. As if they completely forgot that Jesus was able to manufacture food miraculously and feed as many as he wanted to. So this kind of goes to a couple different things, but the big tell in all of this is that if you read through it, it looks like because they were in a far off land, far away it seems, that this was probably a crowd of Gentiles. And being that Jesus' disciples were Jews, they actually looked at Gentiles in a pretty derogatory way. They looked at them as kind of a little bit less than, if you will. And in that sense, it's almost as if their prejudice was being put on full display when Jesus said, we must feed these people. They said, they basically doubted. They said, why? It was almost like they were saying, why? Why are we feeding these people? Like, we don't have any food. Like, why are we even going to bother? And Jesus was showing them in this, I believe, that the kingdom of heaven that he was bringing was not going to be a kingdom of greatness. It was going to be a kingdom of humility. It was going to be a kingdom for all. It wasn't going to be a kingdom just for the Jews. It was going to be for Jew and Gentile alike. And I think in this particular story, we're seeing Jesus showing his disciples who were still at that point thinking that Jesus was going to be this soldier on a horse who was going to fight the Romans and lead them to this great kingdom, that Jesus was still trying to get them to understand that the kingdom he was bringing wasn't a kingdom like they thought of. It wasn't a kingdom that was going to be of this world. It was going to be a kingdom of love and peace and mercy and kindness and generosity. And that's what he's trying to teach his disciples here, who still have the prejudice, who still lack the faith, who still don't seem to understand what Jesus is fully capable of doing, right? So they go through how much food they have, and he says, we took all this food and we can feed all these men, and he does. And he does, and there's food left over. As a matter of fact, they said they have several baskets, 7 large baskets. So there's a difference between the baskets that were collected after the 5,000 and this one, but 7 large baskets. So, I mean, we're talking about a good amount of food there. And there were 7 large baskets left over of food after they fed 4,000 men, which is probably more with women and children included. And they immediately got in the boat and they went to the district of Dalmanutha. Now, when they get there, the Pharisees come out and argue with Jesus, demanding a sign. See, Jesus is looking at the scribes or the Pharisees who confront him, and he's saying to himself, I believe, in what we can read out of this, these people, there is no sign that will satisfy these people. And I think in a lot of ways, there are people in this world where no amount of Jesus's miracles or signs will satisfy them because they just are unbelievers and they don't want to believe. Jesus teaches his disciples previously that if you go to a place to preach in his name and to heal and do great things, and they don't accept you or welcome you, he tells his disciples to kick the dust off their sandals and move on to the next village. And in that way, Jesus is doing that to these Pharisees who are, no matter what sign or miracle he performs, they are unbelievers. They aren't trying to get him to perform a miracle so that they can believe, because they won't and they don't want to. They want him to perform miracles so they can say blasphemy, so they can catch him in some sort of technicality based on human law that is not the law that Jesus is bringing to these people. So Jesus tells them, why do you demand a sign? And he says, I assure you, no sign will be given to this generation, meaning he's saying, you will not receive the sign that you are looking for, because the sign you are looking for is not the sign that I'm going to give. That's what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees who had, obviously, their hearts had been hardened. Now, it goes on, they leave, and Jesus starts telling his disciples, watch out and beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. So the yeast being something that was seen as unclean, or, that's why they had the unleavened bread back in the day. And he was saying the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod, meaning their teachings, right? The Herodians and the Pharisees and their belief in these things that went beyond God's commands and fell into human tradition that Jesus was trying to teach us all we have to leave behind. We have to get rid of human tradition. We have to only follow God's commands. We have to look at God first above all else in all things. He's trying to teach them, beware of the yeast that these people are producing, because it's only going to lead to destruction. And then again, if you can imagine, the disciples start arguing on the boat that they only have 1 loaf of bread. And Jesus looks at them and says, why are you discussing that you don't have any bread? And this is right after he's telling them to beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod, and all they can think about is food. Now, granted, they were probably hungry. But he says, don't you understand or comprehend, or is your heart hardened? Do you have eyes and not see? Do you have ears and not hear? Do you not remember? He says, I broke the 5 loaves and fed 5,000, right? You had 12 baskets of food left after I fed 5,000 plus women and children. He says, I broke 4,000 large, and we had 7 buckets left, they said. He asked them, how many baskets do we have left after the 4,000 were fed? And he says, 7, the disciples say. So he said to them, do you not understand yet? And I think that's how we can all be in this world sometimes. We can see great things and great miracles happen, but we're not quite there in understanding.